Look who's coming on stage. Okay, now you got to have some questions.
When you were talking about Blue Anne, you said that it played a great role for young women when it was first released because,
Blue?
yes,
Yeah.
one way or another woman could relate to it. Do you think it's as relevant today for young women? And
Yes, I
if
do.
not,
I think
is there anything they can relate to today as strongly?
You mean that's stronger than better?
No, that like that's in comparison. Is there
Oh,
anything?
I think there's a whole raft of records by men and women that you can relate to, sure. But I just think what's important about this particular record is that it hasn't been stuck in a moment, as you two once said. It's not stuck in a moment it can't get out of. It's able, and I just wanted to respond to something when we were talking about Blue. I think it stands up for me as a 40-year-old now. It's just as powerful as it was when I was 19. It's not just a young person's record. And in fact, all of Joni Mitchell's work, I think, it spans that.
Our souls aren't changing.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, I mean, it's not like my generation's, you know, there's a lot of things. Your generation values shock, awe, and shopping. You know, so and the female singers have gotten to sound like fishwives. You know, like attitude has kind of gone over the top, and men of your generation can accept that. You know, in my mother's generation, wearing the pants in the family was kind of a threat to femininity. Mm-hmm. We're the experimental generation, and we threw the baby out with the bathwater in a lot of ways. And in terms of my generation, I seem to generally see a little, like, look a little further ahead than most of my contemporaries. And some of the things that disturb me are issues. I saw the sprouts come up out of the ground, and you got full-grown weeds now. So it's not like the things that are being discussed have gone away. So for young girls or young boys, because boys are more open, whereas the men of I think the weak suit in my audience, like black men, gay men, but straight white men. If you see in movies when Joni Mitchell comes up, why are you listening to her? There's always a debate. She hates boats, you know, he loves boats. She loves Joni Mitchell, he hates Joni Mitchell. You know, there's always conflict from white straight males about my music in my generation. They were told that it was demographically incorrect. You know, oh, my girlfriend likes your music. You know, it's like, so I'm always surprised when a white straight male of my generation was able to get by the demographic barrier. You know, my favorite compliments have come from the black community. Girl, you make me see pictures in my head. That was one. And Henry, this blind piano player, said, you make raceless, genderless music. And I treasure that. You know, it wasn't my goal. But I think I speak as a spirit. I think I proceeded neither as a male or a female. There's an interesting concept in red culture, which I really like, in the medicine wheel. And you know, when the culture was intact, in some tribes anyway, the concept was presented in each of us is a small boy, a small girl, an old man, and an old woman. That would be a good concept to introduce at an early age to this culture, and you'd have less conflict when any of these aspects manifest more strongly in an individual. It would be less, you know, the white culture has a tendency to analyze and pigeonhole and categorize, and in recent years then find a way to cash in on that by creating restrictions and things. The music became extremely segregated on the radios and specialized in all camps. Classical music too. They're making this horrible withering atonal crap right now. I just can't stand it. Has no rhythm, no melody. All the things I love are absent, and the people that are narrating, you know, that this artist won in competition, and they're talking in these monotones. No wonder they can like that music. They talk like that. They talk like critics, you know. Well, I thought that was pretty good. You know, how can they? You know, how can somebody who talks like that get into music that's going, whoa, you know, up, down, and everything, you know, and so, you know, I don't know why you're surprised that another generation could, like, there's a tradition in this continent, you know, in the last few decades to rebel against your parents' music and reject it. But if you look at, like, photographs, like, if I look at a photograph of my mother in her youth and put it next to a picture of me in my youth, we look very different. But you take my daughter and I, and you take a picture of her in her youth and me in our youth, and we look like contemporaries. There hasn't been a lot of changes in the last, nothing radical in the last two generations, except that your generation inherited us in an apathetic pocket. You know, we had big dreams, we broke with tradition, and then we failed. And the drugs took over, and there was this apathetic thing in the 70s, and then in the 80s we regrouped, and I'm speaking generally, and got, you know, greedy and materialistic. And you all got caught up, swept up in that thing. So no wonder your value system comes down to shop and non-shop. You know, I mean, but, you know, great, honest music from any time period holds up. If it takes on the track, as long as you avoid hip. Hip is hindsight, hip is a herd mentality, and you know, that's been my biggest problem as a musician working with collaborators, is to get men especially who are more prone to hip, you know, scared not to be hip, to say, well, I won't do that, because why not? Well, it's not hip. And even Mingus, he played a square note. I said, well, Charles, that's been square so long that it's hip again. He said, okay, motherfucker, then you play your note and my note, and you throw in a grace note for God.
I wonder if I could ask a question that I think is on the minds of many, and that is if you would talk about how your painting informs your songwriting, or whether when you think of songwriting, you think of painting, tonal colors, things like that. You know, Miles talked about how he was playing the space between the notes, to use a painting metaphor.
He was. Well, Miles was visual, and Wayne Shorter is very visual. As a matter of fact, you know, I don't have any of the languages of music. I don't write on the staff. I could when I was 7, but I didn't use it or lose it, so I lost it. And then because of the tunings, I never even knew what key I was in, nor did I have the numerical language, you know, or the alphabetical language. I didn't know whether it's A, B, or, you know, what. So I tended to think about music metaphorically. From the metaphor, I think, comes all of the arts. And Wayne Shorter, I would give metaphorical descriptions to, you know, like, okay, you come in here and you get out here, and you start so sad, as sad as you can be, and by the end you get real young. Oh, okay. And he'd just do it splendidly, you know, or he spoke to me frequently in metaphor, like, the first time I played with him was on a piece called Paprika Plains, and we were in London. I'd gone over there to put him and Jocko on, and he said, he told me how he was going to play. He said, it's like you're in Hyde Park, and there's a baby and a nanny, and the baby has a boat, and the wind is just nudging it. Do, do, do. That's how I'm going to play. Or in the middle of a session, he'd go, no, I'm not going to play a horn, I'm going to play strings. And then he'd launch into this whole other way of thinking. And one time I told him, okay, you're the bird. And he played this, God, it was perfect, this, and then he stopped and he went, no, punch me in. I went, no way. You know, like, I'm not erasing that, you know, keep going. But yeah, I would say Laura Nyro was famous for saying, play a little more purple, which everybody kind of laughed at her for that. I never gave color instruction to my players, although I've been quoted as having done that. I didn't. I told Joe Sample one time to play a Japanese wave, and he laughed at me. It was on, was it Harry's House? And he laughed at me and he said, play a Japanese wave. I said, you know, like that, you know. So he played exactly that lick on there, but I want him to ascend and then suck back on himself, you know, like. So I would say, metaphor-fueled, and not a lot of players. Mozart is a mathematical player. I don't really, in Beethoven I hear horses galloping and carriages rolling and a lot of things, and of course in Debussy's very, very, very painterly. There's all kind of pictures coming off of that. So I tend to like pictorial kind of compositions where it's more than notes. You know, so girl, you make me see pictures in my head is like an honor, you know, you know, it's like there's a communication that's taken place.
I'm so curious about your relationship musically with Jaco Pastorius, because people who only know him through Weather Report know him as a jock bass player, and you guys have, I mean, just it's such a rare, sensual dance going on there. Yeah.
Well, it was at the time I was, you know, I was trying to find a rhythm section that I could play with, and I was being offered all these rhythm sections, and they were all dissatisfying to me, and so I would attempt to lead them closer to what I wanted with words, and I just would offend them, you know, and they go, I played with James Brown, you telling me how to play my instrument? You know, like, so I couldn't find a way to, as a female trying to lead men at that particular time, if I was, well, even Chaka, even women, she went, you know, girl, you took all my shit away from me, you just pulled the rug right onto me. I said, no, all I did was sing African, wide palette, hey, you know, and she did it great, but she still, I mean, she didn't hold it against me, and we would continue, you know. But yeah, with the rhythm section, I had strong opinions. I had a difficult time articulating them, and with the best attempts that I made. Also, I came in at a time when I didn't like the sound. They had pillows in their kick drum, and they had dead strings on the basses, and nobody could explain to me why. And I'd say I wanted a rounder, more resonant sound, like Duke's band, you know, with a, you know, like Krupa and even Chuck Berry, when you could hear the bass 2 blocks away. And they say, isn't that a great bass player? I go, I can hardly hear him. He's like muffled and way, way back. And I discovered why was he went from 78 to the album. If the bass band on it was too wide, it took up too much time. You couldn't get enough time on it, so they muffled everything, brought the voice forward, and the rhythm went way into the background. And that's the time that I came to make my music, and I didn't like that. I'd love the bass up front and big, and also I kept saying, I said to one bass player, well, no, it was a drummer, Joe Lala, you know, well, you're playing 2, 4, 6, 8, who do we appreciate? You know, can you play like 2, 7, 11, 3, you know, like that? And he just looked at me like I was crazy, but I wanted something more asymmetrical, you know? So there were all these struggles with communication, and none of them connected, obviously, because it was till my 6th album that I even had a rhythm section on the music. I put it on, take it off, it didn't add anything. And in that struggle with bass players, getting back to Jaco, I said to this one guy, but couldn't you be more like classical music? I mean, couldn't you lift off and go up for a while and play counter melody? You know what I mean? And I sang him some notes. He said, I'm not playing that. I said, why not? He said, it's not the root of the chord. I said, well, if you play it, it will be. You know? You know? And anyway, he said, there's this really weird player in Florida. You'd probably like him. He plays with Phyllis Diller. So I sent for him without hearing anything. I sent for Jaco. And when, you know, I thought, okay, will he do that? You know, okay, I'll send for him. And he was the bass player of my dreams. I mean, he came out, not only was he on the same sonic wavelength, but he was also, you know, leaping up into the air. And I wanted the bass player to show off. I didn't want him to be just a team player. I wanted him to hit, a few jump shots. I wanted him up there. And Jaco, there was no problem with that. It was like holding back of anything, you know. So, and Jaco discovered things on my records. I'd say, no, it's going too Latin. You know, like on Don Juan's Reckless Daughter. Both he and Alex Acuna, I said, it's too Latin. This is more North American Indian. It's kind of, you know, it's 4 on the floor, but it's, you know, it's got to have a kind of a powwow thing to it. So Jaco tuned his bass open, and he didn't even fret. He just went, goo-goo-goo-goo, and he slid all the way down. Halfway through the song, 5 minutes long, he shredded his hand here. It was just bleeding. And we stopped tape, and he changed to this part, goo 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 goo, and by the end of the hand, his hand was just mutilated, like he put it over a grater, and he turned to me and he said, you know, that shit should have been on my record. I said, what difference does it make? You know, you did it. We got it. It's on tape.
Okay, I'll ask my question now. I think you answered this man's question quite beautifully, but I'm 23, so I'll throw my 2 cents in. I have to confess that up until a couple of years ago, I only really knew Joni Mitchell's music from remakes of Big Yellow Taxi. But then about a year and a half ago, I was sitting in a park in Paris, France, reading the news, and it sure looked bad. Still not giving peace a chance, it turns out. Yeah, and California came on, a disc that my friend had made for me, and I'm not from California, but it still seemed relevant because in many ways Paris is still cold, old, and settled in its ways. Though wonderful in other ways too.
Some things don't change, that's what I'm saying. It's like
So my pertinent question is, you know, if I hadn't come across this song in that way, I don't know how I would have. And so my question to all of you and for me is, how do we get honest music to people who are my age, whether we're talking about music that's being made now, music that was made before I was born, or to ensure that music still keeps getting made? Thanks.
Well, have music parties. Put it back in the cherished things. Take the things you love and get some good wine and invite some friends over. And that's the way they used to party in Russia, you know. And they'd get these records like on X-rays of lungs, bootleg. They'd get the vinyl from hold the X-rays and copy it on. And I had a friend, a Russian friend, who had a collection of music. He didn't know who any of it was. It was all ethnic and it was great. Who's that? I don't know. You know, and you look at it and it's got somebody's lung on it, like going around. But pass it on if you love it.
I think one thing is, you know, it's harder to find it in the record store than it used to be. I mean, the music, major label, corporate music industry is in a sorry state right now and in a state of consolidation. And when I was your age, I worked at Tower Records, which is a chain in the States, and it was awesome because we had deep catalog, which is what they call records that weren't made 6 months ago. And so I was able to listen to all this stuff there. But now, I think one place you can look is the internet. I mean, there's a lot of stuff up there for better or worse, and hopefully they're doing the right thing by the artists. That's the main thing, you know. But there's services like Rhapsody, for example, where you can hear a lot of streaming music and really go in depth. And take the time, it's definitely worth it, you know. I still, you know, am discovering records I have not known before. I mean, it's just endless, right? So.
Well, but also the big record stores still keep bins of artists. You know, you can get Billie Holiday bins and Frank Sinatra bins. It's not going away that much.
Yeah.
I've got a bin in big stores.
I think it's almost by definition nowadays that the music that you find on the major labels is not going to be honest music. The pressures of the industry are such that I think there are a lot of honest artists out there, but I think they're getting harder and harder to find. And one thing you can do is look at what the artists you like are listening to. Mm-hmm. You can read the critics that you like, and as Ms. Mitchell says, you can have parties and share music with your friends who might have found something that you didn't know about.
Yeah.
Can I ask? I wanted to also thank you for coming to this, and this is really wonderful for me. And I wanted to ask you earlier, I was speaking about the emergence of jazz in your music, and it's a rare opportunity to actually ask you a little about it. I think for people who know your music, particularly the early music through and over the course of the 70s, it seems like a really surprising development that you moved as far as you did into the world of jazz. And yet when you, from quotes I've read and things I've heard you say, it sounds like for you, I mean, you had listened to jazz when you were younger, and you had always been frustrated by the sort of straight four-on-the-floor approach of a lot of rock musicians. It seems almost like for you it was a very natural development, and I'm just wondering if that was something you aspired to. I mean, was jazz something you thought about for a long time before you actually incorporated it into your music, and how did it feel? Were you surprised at all by just how far you went with that?
Well, I never really aspired to anything, first of all. You know, everything came about kind of by accident. I was to be a painter, and I started playing a ukulele, you know, to accompany my rather rowdy friends singing bawdy drinking songs around a campfire. Then I went to art school, and I mimicked folk music because it was easy, and I could make $15 a night, and that kept me in smoking money and movie money, and you know, on a tight student budget. And I had no ambition or no concept of it as a career or a predilection, and I still hadn't really discovered my talent as anything, you know, but a mimic. And then I guess, you know, like the thing that I see now that was catalyst to it was, you know, the loss, temporary loss, because I got her back, my beautiful girl, but of my daughter, and a bad marriage started to bring this gift to fruition. You know, that the thing drove me into isolation, you know, like, and the process preoccupied me, and then it just all happened. So the first music that I made was not folk music. That was an heir of the industry. I mean, nobody ever really, there's not much folk music on any of my albums. It's more a synthesis of the classical music that my parents, an attempt to emulate that. You know, when my own music started coming out, it started to be a distillate of the things that I had admired. It's not like I approached it in any scholarly way. And
they just saw the long hair and the guitar, and they figured.
Yeah, I looked like a girl, and as a matter of fact, there was no big bidding war on me to sign me up, because I looked like, to the corporates, I looked like a second-rate Joan Baez and Judy Collins, and that was over, you know. So Crosby saw that there was a difference, and he kind of championed me and protected the first record from being produced. He pretended to produce me, but he's too lazy to be a producer. So he didn't do anything, you know. So then I realized, well, if that's what a producer does, I really, you know, I don't need one. So I didn't have one after that. I just, you know, continued to, along with just an engineer. And that enabled me. And I brought my records in cheap, so the company could immediately make their profit. It was just me and a guitar. So they never, as long as they were making money off of me, they kind of left me alone. So we got all the way up to about record 13 before I had synthesized a lot of more complex thing, and I needed sonic assistance. I needed sounds that somebody could show me your color palette. I hired Thomas Dolby for that. You know, can I borrow your sounds now? Because now I want to get into hands-on orchestration and things. And show me how to turn it on. You know, show me some string sounds. I like that one. Okay, go away. You know, let me play this. Okay, now I need sort of a horn-related sound. You know, like so I had palette assistance. Somebody mixed my paints or handed me my camera. One would say, loaded the magazine.
I think I want to add that I think a lot of the Titanic artists of the counterculture era, and Joni Mitchell is among them, we're now seeing them in a different light. We're experiencing a wonderful moment of revisionist history about those artists. So her move to jazz doesn't seem as unnatural now. Dylan, as someone working with the folk tradition, you know, throughout his career, not only, you know, after he went electric as well as before. Jimi Hendrix as someone who is a blues man and also a jazz man. The category is disintegrating, I think, in terms of our revisioning of history. And I think that's really useful. It was, at the time, a marketing category as much as anything else. Mm-hmm. And I find talking to musicians, I'm sure you find this too, that musicians don't tend to call themselves, I'm a rock artist, I'm a, blah. Oftentimes they want to break down those categories. They're not the ones choosing the categories. So maybe it's not as surprising anymore as it used to be.
Well, the other thing too, let me add, the camps were very clearly defined as I entered into it, and I never really fit into any of them. I entered into the folk music camp, but all the folk musicians knew that wasn't really like folk music, and I didn't dress like a folk singer. I was making my own clothes, and they were loud, like chartreuse and burgundy velvet. I was dressing kind of like, I don't know, but quite flamboyantly for a folk musician. They were much more modest, so I didn't look like one. I wasn't really playing, but I was a girl on a guitar, so they tolerated me within that circuit. Then I did the Johnny Cash show, and for a while they thought I was a country singer, and I went into the Grand Ole Opry once, and then the second time I brought in a jazz band, and they never had me back there. So then when it came to jazz, Mingus was my official entrance into the jazz camp, and there were those that thought I was using Mingus, like within the jazz camp, that I was some kind of, who is this Joni come lately, some kind of a musical opportunist. And that was not really accepted. And of course, Robert Hilburn, the LA critic, he can't, he has no jazz, so that jazzy stuff that she does. So as soon as it got jazzy, he was holding me at arm's length, for all those years. And jazz musicians were very prejudiced against rock and roll. It was a condescension to play for the most part. So you had all these, Mingus was prejudiced against electric music. He was upset that I used Jaco because he was plugged in, and that was an old prejudice that I ran into in the coffee houses. And then along comes Brian Blade, like from Shreveport, Louisiana, growing up in a gospel church. He grows up on all things gospel and jazzy, but he loves Neil Young and I. And he can play authentically and has no problem going to a simple, lope, like a prairie lope, I think I call it, So this new breed began to appear that was not harnessed by an orthodoxy. But I got excommunicated several times. They say, well, are you a Baptist or a Catholic? For God's sake, make up your mind, Oh, no, she's a Jew. It's like... So... lines, boxes,
If all of you could join me in thanking our panelists and Ms. Mitchell for this session, and then Don McLean, the Dean of the Faculty of Music, has a few concluding remarks.
It's not really concluding remarks in any lengthy sense. I just wanted to point out to you how difficult it is to get Joni to open up. I had the privilege one night that could have gone on forever and ever, really, because it was just such wonderful substance and content. I'd like to thank her once again for coming and thank the panel for the event. Also, I noted that we had to cut off a couple of questions from students or the 23-year-olds hovering there. And I would like to just mention to those people in particular that there is a session tomorrow, 5:30, at the Faculty of Music for students. Really, it's just for students, we hope. Some staff members from music will be there. And Joni will take some questions. We'll have a nice question and answer period then as well. And just going back to the 23-year-old and Dan's statement, why do you think we're doing this? Obviously, we're doing this to honor Joni Mitchell, but the real way forward about music, whether it's contemporary popular music or serious classical music, which Joni talked about on the way in and in some of her remarks, it's about education. We're fundamentally in the education business here, and the only way to improve and to move forward is to hold events like this and allow the teachers and the students to work together, creating music and talking about music. And that's why I'm deeply gratified for Joni's presence, the presence of the panel today, and for all of you. So have a good evening. Convocation is at 8 p.m. For those of you who are going to it, we need to give Joni a little bit of downtime too. And hope this is the first of many more events like this. Good evening.